Welcome back to Laid Open Podcast. During the hiatus, I finally finished my highly anticipated course, Pathways to Peace Mindful Practices for Transformative and Vibrant Living. Even as I've been working on creating this course, I've used these exact tools to guide myself through situations that reactivated my childhood PTSD. I will teach you these skills along with how to understand your nervous system and reactions, how to think more clearly and gain perspective, how to translate the ways your body communicates through physical sensations, how to identify emotions, where they come from, and what they're telling you, how to discover why you react in ways that produce shame and learn tools to manage these reactions, how to reduce your anxiety and destructive impulses, and how to diminish self-hatred when you are not your best self. The early bird offer starts July 1st, so mark your calendar because it will only be offered for a limited time. If you want to learn more before then, and I hope you do, you can go to my courses page, which is courses.charna.com, that's CASSELL.com for more information. And today's guest is Susan Campbell. Susan's an author, a teacher, a trainer, a psychologist, and a relationship coach. Welcome, Susan.
Learn how to live embodied. Your life is about to unwind. Uncover new tools and start healing. Leave trauma and tension behind. Isn't it great laid open? Let all your desires come true. How can you live laid open? Imagine yourself brand new. Imagine yourself brand new.
Thank you, Charna.
So I was saying a minute ago that I'm really excited to have you on. You have 45 years of experience in this field, so I feel like I'm getting to sit with a master, and I feel like we could talk for hours, and that today what I'm really hoping to dive into is the focus of your latest book and talking about your life's work and what you've discovered around the essentials of being with people, helping them learn how to slow down enough to see their trigger style and how that can impact their own relationship to themselves, but also to all the people in their lives. Yeah, I'm
Sounds
really,
good.
yeah, I'm excited. I also wanted to say, so I know you taught at UMass. I went to Hampshire College and
Oh, I taught there too a little bit.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so I took probably
Yeah.
you may have even taught there when it was first founded.
Yeah, I was part of the founding team.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I got to take some classes at UMass as well. Yeah, just to give people perspective, that was what, 67? That was in the
Mhm.
70s.
Yeah, the late 60s, early 70s.
What's always tricky when you have someone who has so much life experience and hands-on experience is there's a lot to cover. But you
Yes.
but you boiled it down, and the name of your recent book, From Triggered to Tranquil: How Self-Compassion and Mindful Presence Can Transform Relationship Conflicts and Heal Childhood Wounds.
Yep. That's my mission right now. And that actually is the focus that's grown out of all these disparate experiences, working with organizations, teaching in a college, training managers, and doing a lot of one-on-one and couples coaching over the years. It seems to all boil down to humans fear emotional pain, and that's not a bad thing, but we can expand our capacity for discomfort, because in this time, in this world, we need to expand our capacity to experience what's really going on, and that's a lot of stressors. When emotional pain comes up, it's an opportunity to look into what needs healing. So we're afraid of emotional pain, i.e. getting triggered is one symptom of that, but the emotional pain can lead us to where the healing is needed.
No, absolutely. And you speak about moving from a security and control mindset to a learning and discovery mindset.
Hmm.
And if you could speak to how that can shift your reality and your relationships, that would be great.
Good. One of my little buzz phrases too is that our culture is addicted to control. And there's a paradigm of control. We see it in management, we see it in parenting. But what that means is we're trying to manage the outcome of our communications to fall within a comfort zone, call within our own comfort zone.
Right.
That tendency to want to manage and control, but that's not the way the world really is.
Mhm.
I think the learning discovery, or what I now call relating, the relating mindset, controlling versus relating, is my new terminology, is more like a surfer surfing an ever-changing reality, the ever-changing now. And that's that paradigm is just emerging, and it's what I see as the new human. Like we have to really intentionally develop new human capacities to be able to manage constant change and people who are different from ourselves. Those are the big world stressors right now.
What's interesting, I'm curious, given how long you've been doing this work, and this is that there's a point in time that we're existing in right now where there is certain change. I mean, there's so much devastation on so many levels, whether it's climate, whether it's social justice related power dynamics and systems at place that really need to crumble before they can reform. And then that works on it's like what works on a systemic level works on an individual level. And I've seen I've experienced personally with clients, like so much success on an individual level. And then I get overwhelmed when I think of how can we apply this on a systems level. And I think what you're saying is absolutely essential.
Yes, and let me make a link between the individual and the systems level, to the extent that a healthy system, one of the definitions of a healthy system based on systems theory, is good communication between all subparts. So in a human organism, a lot of we call them subparts, or our parts, are repressed because of early childhood trauma. They're fragmented off, and we don't have access to the energy of our full being. And so there's a lot of rejected parts, let's just say, in a human. And that's parallel to society. There are a lot of rejected parts, or we're canceling the people who don't think like us, or we just are uncomfortable with differences. Plus, there's religious wars, territorial wars, and then, of course, trying to figure out what to do with the climate. That's a lot of us are in denial about that too. So these are all kind of pushed away, rejected, or actually repressed parts. So the work of looking into your trigger reactions, that's like a knee-jerk reaction, stop controlling me, or you're abandoning me. So just to bring a little humanness into the picture here, those kind of examples. The work there is beginning to get to know those rejected parts, that little inner wounded child who's 4 years old and learned to stop asking for what she wanted because it was so frustrating and painful to not get it. And so there's a lot of those shutdowns in humans. But as we look into our trigger reactions and really, in a slow, careful way, listen to what's going on in our bodies, what memories are ready to come up, and kind of embrace those rejected parts through emotional relating in the here and now, often with a guide like a coach or therapist like you and me, have a safe enough container so that we can feel feelings that we never felt safe enough to feel at the time, partly because it's a safe container now, but also just because you're an adult now and you do have more capacity to feel pain. So that's what I kind of want to guide people into. And so as you go through the the pain of feeling the unfamiliar, the rejected, the hurting. You're making yourself more whole. You're getting to know all your parts, we could say, and becoming more one. So that whole making process is the same thing that once we learn to do that with ourselves and with our intimate others, like couple, family, so forth, we've got a template now for at least how to begin the problem solving, the collective conversations that we need to have in the world, and how to create subsystems, ecologies, or architectures. Different people use different words for true communal healing.
Yep.
So I think the individual work really gives us the muscle and the sort of deep understanding of what life's trying to do here. And life's trying to do whole making.
Well, and it's, I feel like the more people, and this is why this subject is a subject that I'm creating a course on, because I'm right in alignment with you, where I feel like the more people who have access to these tools and can develop the capacity to accept all parts of ourself, you then have so much more compassion for people outside of you and people who are
Yes.
different than you, and the range of, right? We don't
Yes.
vilify. It's like, we become less black and white and
That's all true.
less polarized, right? And then the part where I get, it's like that I sit with this question of, in terms of healing the collective body, it's like, because, if you can accept all these different parts inside of yourself, right? And you see the disowned parts, you're less likely to get triggered and so dysregulated or overwhelmed that you lash out externally. So then if you think of that on a collective scale, it's like, how many of us have to individually do that internal healing so that we become a mass that can affect global or collective change? The people in power are the ones who need to, unless we topple the power.
The critical mass theory, and there is something to that. And they often say, 30% of the population. I don't know if there's any real research on this, but
Yeah.
if 30% of us reach this other level of being more integrated as humans and being able to really not just tolerate, but actually be interested in differences, for example, because it's all about increasing our capacity for emotional pain and dissonance between ourselves and others, because that's painful, but increasing our capacity. So then we're holding it in a much bigger frame. We're in a we. Hey, we've got a difference. We've got a problem. And the problem is our difference. It's not you're the problem.
Right.
And
Well,
all of those technologies are available now for individuals and small groups, translating them into larger systems, the whole world and the politics of relationships between parties or countries. Well, we've got a ways to go, but there are a lot of visionaries working at this level now.
yeah. Well, I'm going to bring it back. I know it's hard. I was excited to, and I would love to maybe offline have a bigger conversation about how we can relate this globally. And then let's just come back down to the individual and to couples, because your work is so necessary. And one of the things that we just started to touch on is you emphasize in your book, and it's the beginning point of being able to accept, like, getting triggered is a universal experience.
Yeah.
And if you can't accept that or see that about yourself, it makes it really hard to change it.
Yeah, there's too much shame in our culture about not having all together, where I don't react. So we need a critical mass of us who admit that we do get triggered sometimes, especially by the people we love and depend on the most. And that acceptance is still, that's what a lot of people have the hardest time with, actually.
And this is one of I think you outline like 5 steps
Yeah.
for shifting and understanding how to move through a trigger.
Yeah.
And so this is the first step.
First step is acceptance. Yeah. Acceptance is simply knowing though that there's something in your nervous system that's actually wired to scan for danger, and there was real danger to your healthy development at times, or some kind of a lack in getting your early needs met, like the need for co-regulation, somebody to run to when you're scared, who will hug you and reassure you and show you how to calm your nervous system down. We all have that reactive part of our brains that's looking for danger, seeking reassurance, and coming back to equilibrium. But almost all of us also have many situations in our childhood where our parents just didn't realize what we needed. And so we're all stuck with a certain amount of what we call developmental trauma. You might not have been beaten, or you might not have lived in a war zone, but certain needs, like I was mentioning earlier, just the need for loving attention or co-regulation wasn't met enough. And what's enough for different people is different, but it leaves you with this tendency to be afraid that's going to happen again in your adult relationship. And just understanding the psychology of that and how it's built into being human, that you're going to get triggered because something in your present, especially if you're in an intimate relationship, there's going to be something your partner's going to do that's going to be frustrating, and that's going to bring back like flashbacks or almost like repressed memories, but the reactions are there of not getting that same need met when you were 4 or 3, or when it really was more of a survival issue. Understanding the brain science and the psychology can help with acceptance. And then I'll go to the next of the 5 steps of trigger work. So the next one is, so now I accept it. So now I get curious about this thing called getting triggered. And I want to have more mastery over it and more awareness about when it's happening. And we really can learn to do that. So we learn, what's your unique trigger signature? When you get triggered, you're going to have some kind of bodily reaction. You're going to have some kind of feeling, like bodily reaction of feeling like you got punched in the gut or something. And a feeling of like anger or wanting to leave the room and get the heck out of there. Those are typical things that tell you're triggered. So people learn to reflect on, okay, the last time I was triggered, that was my body sensation, that was my feeling. And we also have stories that come up in our minds, like that person doesn't like me anymore, or they don't like me as much as I like them. And so those stories are just something to learn to watch for. So if I have any of those reactions, body sensation, that feeling, or that story, time to slow down, time to check in with myself. I must be triggered. So you can learn what your unique trigger signature is, and you can talk to your partner about it if you have a partner or a friend, or I like to have people find a practice partner to do these practices with, because this book is really a series of practices to grow into that next level of human. So then the next stage.
So before we go
ahead.
there, I would like to go a little deeper into this one. I think it's really important. And you also just said the magic word, which is practice.
Yeah.
And I think I love the idea of having a practice partner because it's a more neutral being than your partner, right? And often, for instance, a little off topic, I'll give a client masturbation homework, and they're working on a certain thing that they then can bring into their relationship. It's that really you want to practice a certain amount before you try to start practicing with your partner, because there's all sorts of emotions and all things that get so much more complex when it's with your most tender relationship. And so it's great when you can't practice some of this stuff. Some you can practice on your own, but it is really useful to have a practice partner that is lower state.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is useful and interesting that you were talking about in your book is how your trigger signature can be connected to your attachment style.
Absolutely. just a short version of that is if you feel like running out of the room or kind of wishing the other person would shut up, you're probably an avoidant attachment type. And if you want to run after the partner, what did you mean by that? We got to keep talking. You're probably what they call either preoccupied / anxious attachment. Those are just terms, but they do often help couples particularly accept that, wow, you're wired differently than me. You're walking away because you're overwhelmed, not because you're abandoning me. And that's really hard for the more preoccupied person, can tolerate a lot more excitation and they want verbal connection when they're triggered. That's reassuring. But for the more avoidant, it simply means your nervous system is actually a bit more sensitive. And you look like an insensitive person, but actually a bit more sensitive to the potential overwhelm of staying in contact when it doesn't feel safe for you. So this idea about attachment styles that helps partners have empathy for one another.
That example, it was just illustrated in a session I was doing with a couple, and I used martial arts-based practices. And so I was doing something where I was walking towards one of the people, and just for her husband to start to see what her reaction was, and me pointing out, like, look, I'm a neutral person that hasn't, harmed her in a variety of ways, and there's no history here. And look at how her nervous system is responding, right? This is not personal. So it starts to depersonalize it. It's just seeing like two psychobiologies interacting and what automatically occurs.
That's great intervention.
I love I love physical practices that help people depersonalize what's occurring, and then they can have more compassion because it's not personal. The other thing that I thought was that's really important, because people who are more avoidant can often, sometimes there can even be a superior attitude of like, well, I don't get triggered. It's all her fault. It's all his fault. And so like blaming the other person or feeling like, well, I wouldn't get triggered if you don't get triggered. But then just recognizing the beginning judgments as even a sign of trigger, right?
Exactly. There's a whole section just to avoidant personality styles in my book, because it's a little harder for those of us who are avoidant to see our reactivity, and judgmental thoughts are one of those reactive stories that's part of your trigger signature, perhaps, or a superior attitude, and how that shows up in some kind of mental story about yourself versus the other. That means I'm triggered, even though I'm not even aware of anything going on in my nervous system. I feel calm.
Yes. Well, and that piece is so important because, when someone's like more numb, or they can't, they're just like, I'm able to stay in my window of capacity to be with sensation. Like I'm fine. It's that person over there. It's harder to get in touch with. It's less externalized and visible, right? Not visibly escalated. So I just thought that was a really important part of your book.
Yeah. And I try to encourage the more avoidant type to be curious and be interested, because a lot of them are very mentally smart. That's been their main defense. So, isn't this interesting how somewhere down there, if we follow that feeling of wanting to run out of the room, whoa, if I stay with, and see, that's the trigger work that now I try to help people learn to do and do it with them. It's just, your partner said something, you had a judgment or an urge to leave. Stay with the feeling, stay with the sensation, and so forth. And after a while, memories might emerge. And then this person like, well, that little thing where I dropped the pizza that the family had bought for the group, and I was like shamed for that little tiny thing, that was no trauma. No, they don't even have to be trauma to create these trigger reactions. They can be just unfortunate incidents where you felt like you weren't good enough, or that sort of thing.
And that also, that's really important because so often if you're working with a couple and one person has had, they've been sexually assaulted
Mm.
or they've had intense developmental trauma, the other person will often look to them and go like, they're the one who needs to do the work.
Yes.
There's not something for me to do.
Yes. I wouldn't ever get triggered if my partner wasn't unhappy with me or my partner got triggered. And so what? That's actually true for a lot of partners. But
Mhm.
what, you still got the trigger now. And the trigger is actually a gift to know yourself more deeply. And you had to have a kind of a over expressive partner, at least over expressive in your world, to trigger you. If you would have been with another a really reasonable type, like you wouldn't be able to know yourself as
That's
deep.
right.
So you must be on a growth path. Sometimes I'll just
Right.
be on a growth path that you wouldn't have picked it.
You're lighting each other up in just the perfect way. Like your soul picked this person to evolve with, right?
Yes, and not everybody is on a growth path, and I don't assume that they are, but they're just operating at a less sensitive level of their humanity. But an awful lot of us are, and of course, anybody who'd be listening to your podcast is on the growth path. I'll assume.
Yes, I think that's hopefully a good assumption. If they're making it this far and they're paying attention, then yeah, great. And so you were gonna say, so the next,
So yeah,
the
so
third step.
we've got acceptance and knowing your trigger signature, and now once you know your trigger signature, learning to pause to regulate your nervous system when you notice any one of those early warning signs that you found in your trigger signature. So being able to go, oh, there's that judgmental thought. Ooh, and there's actually a kind of a tight feeling about that. Let me pause. Let me feel into that some more. And you can actually do a little bit of the inner trigger work just through that pausing
Mhm.
and knowing there's a trigger there somewhere, but you're not trying to get into it yet. You just let me calm my nervous system because I need to be well resourced if I'm going to dig into what this is all about for me. And
Mhm.
so breathing techniques, grounding techniques, like just feeling the chair holding you, feeling your feet on the ground. Or for some people, there'll be other kinds of tools that'll work better for you, like just walking a certain path around your yard can be calming, turning on music. So different people have different ways to calm their nervous system, but the breath is always available. So
Right.
I like to encourage that. Try that and see if that works. And I have a number of different breath work practices in the book.
Yeah, such an essential and direct way to shift our state.
Yes,
Right.
it's a gift nature gives us because nature
Really,
really gives us all the tools we need for our healing.
it's pretty profound.
Yeah.
That piece I want to emphasize for listeners. There's pauses that we need to take when we're relating. We may need to take a pause, and you even talk about a pause agreement, right?
Mhm.
So in advance, establishing that this is something we're going to do. I'm not abandoning you, letting the person know I may need to take 20 minutes. I may need to take a longer time before I'm ready to jump back in. And you talk about, which we can get into later, but just in terms of the repair process, like
Mhm.
pause may need to be longer. One person may need a longer pause than the other,
That's right.
and how we can manage that.
And in a partnership, especially an intimate couple type relationship, it's really good to have an agreement. Okay, we've stepped in this vicious cycle together all too often. Let's make a pause when we see ourselves doing that. Or let's make a pause when I see myself. Sometimes you don't even know it. When I see myself amping up my nervous system and, I want to bite your head off. We have to kind of agree that there's a rationale for that this is good for us, not just one person. But as you were alluding to, sometimes that person who feels safer when there's verbal connection going on, talk to me. That's hard because the other person often is the one who needs more of a longer pause. And so there's techniques in the book to short circuit the decision-making process, the decision of how long is this pause going to be.
Mm-hmm. And
Oh,
and the another piece I think is useful. It's there are people who may push themselves, right? Especially in our culture. It's like override their trigger, try to keep pushing through
mhm,
it. So for, like for me, I do a pause with myself, right?
mhm,
So I actually, when I'm working out, I've been working a particular part of my back that holds a lot of, unfelt material, right?
mhm,
It's like in that, it's like crunchy in my rhomboids, in the behind my shoulder blades. And so as something I can feel, like part of my trigger
yeah,
signature is my
mm,
heart starts to beat faster and I can start to feel this emotion welling up. And when that starts to happen, I tell my trainer knows at this point. I just
mm,
pause and I just want to be with. And then there might be a memory that I see in my mind's eye, or there's just emotion that needs to move through. And I let myself, sometimes cry and then go back to
mhm,
working out.
mhm.
But so just an encouragement for people to, you might be driving, it might come out of nowhere, but to
Yeah,
take that pause because you don't want to keep overriding and do to yourself what maybe others did to you, which is not create room for the emotion to surface.
that's right. Even in a work relationship, sometimes I'll encourage people to just at least say, I need a moment. And you don't do the whole process, but you feel if you do the I need a moment for it to really work well, you probably need to have done the longer version of
Mhm.
the inner exploration of that feeling. But I need a moment, or take a bathroom break. Oh,
Exactly.
take your take care of yourself, because otherwise you're on automatic. You might not know it, but it's affecting your relationships.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
So pausing is one of the biggest gifts you can give to yourself and to your partner.
Mhm. And so then from pause.
The next thing is staying with some of those sensations and emotions. Learn to be with the the feelings, the body sensations, and the feeling tone of the story, because there often is some kind of unfortunate learning that you came away with. I call it learning the wrong thing. Like, nothing I ever do is done right. You maybe had an overly critical parent or something. So I can't do anything right. So that's your story. Or people are against me. When you notice that, as well as any feeling or sensation, and then you pause, then you stay with it, because you're kind of like now on pause. You're not
Mhm.
engaging. You could do the work if a partner and you are both together. You could do the work side by side, but you got to go inside for a while and feel safe enough. There has to be an environment of safety. So a lot of times you don't want to be sitting in the same room with the person where you just got triggered with each other.
Mm.
Usually you're
Mhm.
a little,
Mhm.
although the person who, like we said, the more preoccupied person, it really is important to, like, maybe if you could, if you have a partner, just maybe put your hand somewhere on the person's body and say, I know we'll get through this.
Yeah.
That's that sort of thing. Or
Mm.
we'll check back in 20 minutes, okay? And then in 20 minutes, I might not be quite ready to go to the next step, but at least we're going to check in.
Yeah.
So then that being with sensations and emotions can take maybe 15 minutes, generally, in my experience, to really sit with yourself and just be curious and let your feelings come up. And there's step-by-step guidance in the book, From Trigger to Tranquil, that you can just guide yourself through this. Or I've got a lot of YouTube videos that are free on the web where I guide people, and you can find those.
Yeah, that's great. One of the phrases that I find really helpful with couples, it's like with if somebody needs more space and because of their history and then also it gets repeated in their relationship, you can take all the space you need
Mhm.
and I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere and you can take all the space you need. if the person who has more of the kind of come towards and engage can
Mhm.
actually give the other person some space, that creates a certain level of safety that person may never have had.
That's a beautiful suggestion to the person who's got
Mm,
the urge to quickly close the gap there.
mm.
It's hard. It'll be hard for most of the people who are more, let's call it preoccupied, anxious. But it can also give them the empowered place to come from, what you're saying. Okay, I'm not helpless. I'm actually being generous here by giving my partner a little more space. So that can trick their mind into feeling safer
Well, it's
about being out of contact,
yeah, it's definitely it's the first place that I learned how to use that was more in a somatic and trauma environment, doing physical practices and like
Mhm.
really establishing a quality of safety. Sometimes there's contact there, and sometimes there's just like I'm all the way across the room from my
Mhm.
client, and having a partner be in the room and participate in that kind of a practice or witness that again, it comes back to this not taking it personally and realizing there's a 4-year-old or 6-year-old part of
Yeah,
that client.
yeah,
It's not about them. And it just
yeah,
happens to keep showing up because it's so old, right, or
yeah,
so young. Um,
yeah. I see what you mean. You were
yeah.
first talking about it as, you're the therapist and modeling that and doing work with one client, I mean, one of the partners,
But then
while the other witnesses, I do that all the time,
but
and
then they,
people seem
yeah.
fine with that.
And I've had feedback from it's like that then that partner who's
Mm,
also participating and saying those things and getting that
mhm,
kind of like
mhm.
that new tape established in their mind in
Yeah,
the listener's mind, but also in the speaker's mind. It's like, oh, you now have facility and can speak it from a place
mhm.
that's not like from their wounded kid, right?
Yes, yeah,
Then also an attachment piece, right? It's totally a little bit of an attachment trick. It's like if the person who tends to be more anxious can take responsibility for the boundary, then the
mhm,
person who's more avoidant is like, oh, and they
mm.
can have the freedom to move towards you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have to learn this from actual experience, because I'm telling
Yes.
you now,
Oh,
it's not
doesn't
gonna
work.
sink in.
No.
But, you could if any of our listeners wanna try that as an experiment, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's all in theory. It's easier. It's like reading a book versus about learning how to ride a bike versus actually physically putting your body into it.
But people can learn from books and podcasts,
They
and,
can.
I get mail all the time, so isn't and you do too, right? It's just wonderful that some people are motivated enough to just read the book and learn the practices, and, especially couples together. That's one of the hardest things, to find a
Yeah.
partner who's a match for you on
Mhm.
both wanting to do these practices. And if your partner's not a match and
Mm.
you're in a intimate couple, do your best to enroll them in a way that expresses your feelings and needs versus the criticism of them.
I've actually, since reading your book, I've referred it to a lot of my clients, and it was very validating for me because I was like, "Oh, here's this master," and I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely, okay, check." Like, I'm like, "Yeah, I will always practice this for the rest of my life," and
Mm,
I've had to come to these things piecemeal, and I love that it's all in one book. When it's
thanks.
like, where was this book 30 years ago? So,
I was,
yes.
I was teaching this stuff 30 years
Oh,
ago,
I'm
but,
sure
but I hadn't codified it well enough yet for
well, but it's like
that.
what you said, people around the world, I mean, my people listen to this podcast surprisingly in like all these countries around the world, and now they'll have this book as an access point. It's all,
Mhm.
in one place versus figuring it out through life, right? Well,
Yep.
we're always figuring it out, but so you're so sitting with the feeling,
Mhm.
that's the step we're on, right?
Yeah.
Being with it.
And if you've done a thing with a partner where you took a pause, you did some self-calming, and then you each went into your individual being with and exploring the sensations and emotions. That's where we are in the process now. The fifth stage is repair, where now you come back together and you talk about what you saw about yourself and reveal the deeper feelings and needs that the trigger reaction was trying to get met, but they were doing it from the survival brain rather than the part of the brain that can collaborate and can empathize. So now you've got your higher brain back online because you've done your calming and you've shown compassion for that tender feeling, whether you've gotten a memory or not. So there's in the practice I use, I call it compassionate self-inquiry. So you eventually do, once you feel this and keep breathing and being with, you develop a witness consciousness that feels for yourself. You feel tender towards yourself or empathy for yourself. Ideally, there are exceptions to people's ability to do this. And, I will talk about that in a separate part of the book. But if all goes well, you've connected with, this core fear of not being good enough is somehow linked to a few times, nothing horrible, when my father criticized me for being a failure. But, he also was a great dad in so many other ways. So why am I so triggerable? Well, you connect with that. Don't feel good enough because that needs to be looked into a little more. You're left with that unfinished business as an adult where, I'm a super achiever. I'm totally good enough. But my wife says something and I feel like I'm 6 years old again. So you might come in contact with memories and insights like that. And, I judged you for being overreactive out of my fear of feeling that old feeling of being criticized. Your unhappy reaction, like your unhappiness with me, brought back those memories of not good enough. And so I just wanted to obliterate that feeling, and I lashed out or I withdrew or I shut down. So you have a little bit of an explanation. And I recommend that I have a script for doing a good repair where you're not just going back and reiterating your reasons and what you were trying to say, and your excuses for saying it in a way that didn't work with your partner. You're not doing it that way. You're actually just telling them when this happened, this unfortunate thing, like I walked out on you, I was triggered. So you start with that. You start owning the fact that you were triggered. So ideally, you're going to fill this script out in preparation for delivering it to your partner. And you're going to each take a turn. And this is with couples. With no couple relationship and you just got triggered, a repair may or may not be indicated with the person. Or sometimes there is no person. You're triggered by your own painful thoughts, like just feeling like a failure, feeling, geez, I'm not doing anything with my life. We often just get triggered by our own mind.
Yeah.
And that deserves compassion too. And that's coming from some place that needs to be held, compassionately held. But let's say you've got a partner, so you filled out your repair statement so that you can speak on a feeling level. You're not reasoning with the person or giving excuses. You say, so I was triggered. I am sorry I did that. If that's needed, you didn't deserve that. When I heard you say this, it brought back memories of, and the ones I just alluded to, but you just try to do it in like one sentence. Times that my father used to criticize me when I was 6. And what I was really feeling was the fear that I'm not good enough or that I'm not enough for you. So you can feel there's a vulnerability there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little bit of an explanation mentioning the past. That isn't always necessary, but it I think helps the partner, especially in the beginning of when a couple is starting to do these repairs. It helps to hear that, yeah, that my partner came into our relationship with that trigger. It's not
Yeah.
about
Right.
me, you know, it's theirs and they're owning it. And just hearing that my partner's owning it, saying I got triggered and it was really about this painful memory and you didn't deserve that sort of thing. It's just so reassuring. But then the final step in the trigger repair is, okay, so I just confessed that I'm having trouble feeling good enough. I need your help to feel that I really am good enough, or that you really do think I'm good enough, or some asking for reassurance in a very simple way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
And
it,
then I recommend certain ways of responding in an honest way to the partner's bid for reassurance. Sometimes the best you can do, because you haven't had a chance to be heard yet, but you haven't delivered your repair statement. Sometimes the best you can do is, I hear you, honey, or something kind, without saying, yes, you're the greatest person in the world, and so forth. But other times you're really moved to say, you are so enough for me. You know, you'll just be moved to give that reassurance.
yeah. And I think that one of the things that can be so key there is the language that like you emphasize that in terms of if you're starting to explain, like use the script, because otherwise it can
Hmm.
come across as a justification. And when you're justifying, it can be like defending. And then when you're defending, that's actually a fight response. That's how that registered for
Yes.
that's how it registers for the other person.
Yeah.
So language, the subtlest difference in language can make such a huge difference in terms of someone's capacity to hear you and have compassion versus get defensive too.
Yeah. Yeah. People might feel, well, it's scripted and it's phony because it's scripted. Trust me, it'll work
Initially,
better. Yeah, like follow the script at first, because there's just such an automatic tendency to flip in those
Mhm.
self-justifying words and
Sure.
even tone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you won't, when you do the script, it won't be completely your words at first either. But a lot of times, the words I give people or that I suggest in the book are actually a little truer. You know, it's hard to admit, but they're a little truer than the sugar-coated words that you might use if you have like, I have a fear of being bad or wrong. A
Mhm.
lot of times people can't get that one because
Mhm.
most of those people weren't severely traumatized. It was more things just not getting attention. It was more like being neglected or perhaps criticized in not a violent way. But there's still this desire to be seen as good. And so if you have that one, or if you think you might have that one, just be real curious about your trigger reactions and see what you learn.
Yeah, a little scary to use more honest language. And a big part of your, just like a side note,
Mhm.
radical honesty is a huge part of your background, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I wrote this book called Getting Real because in radical honesty and other honesty frameworks, it's really great. We should all be honest. But what I was thinking is, how many of us have the necessary skills to really be honest?
Mm-hmm.
Can we make it safer to be honest? So that's what my work does in the book Getting Real. 10 true skills you need to live an authentic life. So it's another version of how to be the new human that we're evolving toward. How to be one of those 30%.
And what's so important, so my background is in working with trauma, and you need to have that safety piece
Mhm.
established before you can have the connection piece. And a lot of people come in and they're like, we want to have better sex. Like I also work with sex and
Yeah.
sexuality. And
Yes.
so people want to jump to more connection or whatever that means for them,
Mhm.
but safety is so essential. And
Yeah.
so, these books are really useful for creating more internal and external safety.
Yeah. And self-awareness, I think, is really the key to creating safety for other people. Self-awareness and self-acceptance. And all these tools that I teach are really about that. If you aren't trying to defend yourself, if you're really okay with how you are, warts and all, then that defensive layer can fall away and can just be curious when somebody gives you feedback that's not what you were hoping for. Tell me more about what gives you that impression.
Let's come back to repair for a moment, because there's some important distinctions that you made inside of that part of your book. So you're talking about, like, sometimes it might be that you come to some conclusions on your own, and then it may not be necessary to always share or to repair. But then, so speaking to the length of time that some people might need to take before they repair, like premature repair,
Yeah.
unilateral repair. Do you want to speak
Yeah.
to that?
Let's start with the amount of time if you're in a dyad and you've triggered each other. And most of the time, I'll just say, when one person is triggered, the other person is somewhat triggered too if you're in one of these intimate, interdependent type relationships. So both people are triggered, but one person thinks they don't need much time or they don't want to. So we have to talk about that, not right after the trigger. At first, you need a bigger conversation about, yeah, what are we going to do about this pause? We're going to need a pause agreement, like a safe word, like just the word pause, or one couple used the word pineapple for whatever reason. I don't know. That worked for them. So you get a safe word, and that means we'll just stop talking and look inward and regulate our nervous systems. The length of time, now that's a bit of a issue between us because we don't take the same amounts of time. What would feel somewhat safe to you, even though it's a stretch? So we just talk it out when we're not triggered. And I've got a system where it's like short, medium, and long. So eventually we go, well, what's a short pause? Oh, I think short pause is like 20 minutes. What's medium? Maybe an hour. Maybe long is 3 or 4 hours. I think it's really unfortunate if people can't repair within 24 hours, because that really means that they're not in my world, they're not working hard enough. Yes, it's very traumatizing what happened, re-traumatizing. But I just think that you can learn to do it within a day. So then they figure out what their shorthand is going to be. And what that means is we'll check in after 20 minutes and see if we're both ready. But if we're not, okay, we'll wait another 20 minutes and check in again. So that's just the way most couples find that works. And a lot of times in the process, people will get re-triggered if I'm ready now and my partner's not. And so, life is messy, folks. I have all these wonderful guidelines and so forth, but they won't always prevent triggering with good planning. If it's ready to come up and it needs to come up, that's nature's way of telling you that it can't be denied, and I guess you better look at it. Because what choice do you have? It came up. So that's the one issue around how long to pause and then when to repair. The other issue sometimes is, you mentioned the word unilateral repair, and I've got a section in the book where my partner was triggered and they made a whole bunch of judgmental thoughts about me, and they kind of were cold for half a day or something, but I didn't even notice it. This was all going on over there. I thought we were doing fine. And so the person who needs to do the unilateral repair has to know enough and be committed enough to the health of the partnership to check in and know that you're triggered. And it's one that could take over 24 hours to even kind of know that you're triggered. And that's forgivable. I'm not saying you're not working hard enough to that person. It's like whenever you're aware of being triggered, that's the time to start dealing with it. It could be a few days where you just are feeling kind of off with your partner, and then you go, oh, yeah, she gave me the response that I wanted when I asked her if she wanted to walk into town with me and get coffee. She just very kind of coldly said, I'm doing something else. And ever since then, I've felt like distant from her. I guess I better go do a repair and confess. So a unilateral repair is where you sit your partner down and say, I need to do a repair with you, even though you didn't know what was going on inside me for the last 3 days. But get used to that, needing to do that. Some of you especially will find that important. Others, it just can't hide from yourself and you're pissy and you go, I guess I better go talk about it. So you do the same kind of thing. When this happened, I was triggered. I think it was my fear of not being important, not being significant, being invisible to you, whatever words, you find, I've got lots of different choices of words and ways to label these fears in the book, but you might not even have a perfect word. And pair doesn't require that you have the perfect word. If you're struggling for the word, like, oh, I felt something like unimportant or small, it's almost more sincere if you're just struggling for the right word sometimes.
Yeah.
So kind of don't worry about that part. But then you need to end it by asking for some kind of reassurance. So it's basically a confession. This was what got triggered. My fear and my need is to feel that I am important to you. And then you just stop there or you wait for some reassurance. I sometimes like to suggest the phrasing, I need your help to feel that I'm important to you. I'm the one with the issue of not being important. You don't. I'm not expecting you to be a mind reader about that, but now I'm telling you, I need some help around this. And that's the least controlling way to phrase that. There are other couples where it's really okay to say, I need to feel that you won't abandon me or something. Some people need to say it, and it's okay with the partner to use less correct language in terms of our communication, but it comes sometimes, whatever comes from the heart.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pointing to loosely the nonviolent communication steps,
Yeah.
right? Like identifying what your need is when it's not getting met, what you end up feeling, and a memory that's associated with when you didn't get that need, and then being able to make some kind of request around
Yeah.
support and connection. And I'm curious also about when it's the opposite way, where when there's someone who's often they're triggered, and maybe it's unilateral, maybe it's not, but in both situations where the person gets triggered and then they're constantly bringing up their triggers, right? And so the other person, maybe initially they're open to processing and then they get worn out. I see this a lot with couples, right? Like one person who's maybe more anxious or more self-aware or has a bigger history of trauma, so that there's it can feel like a minefield, like there's a lot that's triggering. Or if there's a lack of resolution, so it's not really getting resolved, and so it's gonna keep coming up, right? It's okay, here it is to resolve again, here it is to resolve again, and the other person is backing away from, and it becomes less willing to process.
Yeah. So that situation probably requires third-party help.
Yeah.
I mean, friends who are listening, if you're at all in that situation, there's something going on that's trying to be communicated, not just I was triggered. It's there may be one person needs a little more attention that the partner can't fully give, and they may have to find a way to come to terms with that difference. Some needs you have are never going to be met by this person. And some people were so traumatized. That's the hardest thing to accept with an adult partner. And you might need some individual work to come to terms with the reality, that need. This is the life you've got kind of thing. And how do we find a way to make this interesting and growthful and even pleasurable by the learning that's going to come from this. And that requires a little more attention than exactly what's in my book. You might need to hire one of us folks. Help you there.
Again, the book, it's a beautiful starting place to start to build that awareness. And you find yourself where you go, wait, this is actually not enough. Then, then you can seek external support. And then along those lines, you train other therapists and coaches. You also do intensives with couples and do workshops. Do you want to say any more about that?
I'm 82 years old, so I'm moving into that final stage of my career where I just work a little bit. But I do one in-person workshop a year. So then the next one is also the second week in May in 2025. And I'm doing a webinar. I do more webinars now rather than in-person events. And my next webinar starts September 19th, going through a lot of this material that we've talked about. And my website, susancampbell.com, describes what my offerings are. And then I do an ongoing Honesty Salon weekly series. A small group is working with the material in the book, Getting Real. But we also work with what happens when you get triggered in a group. And there's a real safety there for people to admit they're triggered and sometimes reveal what that seems to be about. But we don't do the whole trigger work sequence in there. And I see 2 clients a day now, 5 days a week. So it's not like I'm super retired, but compared to the way I used to work, this is like retirement. And I'll work this way until I can't anymore, either physically or mentally. Yeah. So I love my work. It's just who I am.
What is relational freedom? How would you describe that?
Relational freedom is essentially you not being bound by any ideas of who you should be or what society expects. It's in each moment you're aware. It takes a lot of self-awareness to not just negotiate your inner truth, but also who's with me here? What's the whole context? So I would say relational freedom is the ability to take what's inside of you and craft it in a way that fits the situation. And then ideally, and this is a little bit beyond freedom, but this would go into creativity, you're able to raise the level of awareness and love in the context. So you're able to create the context that feels more harmonious for everybody in the room, let's say, or everybody in your field.
I love that.
But basically, I could say freedom's just another word for nothing left to hide. But hide, there's so many things we hide from. What's inside, what we actually can obviously see in the other, but we hide from it, and what our contexts are. So your world is always self, other, and context. And don't hide from any of those, and you'll be free.
I love it. And so now, if you would be willing to lead us in a 5-minute exercise, that would be so lovely.
I think I'll guide people in the trigger signature exercise.
Great.
So this is that exercise where you get in touch with what are some of the elements, the early warning signs of a trigger reaction. So those of us who are listening, other than those of us who are driving, that probably wouldn't be a good time to do this, but do it later when you can be in a quiet, private location where you feel safe. And just allow your breathing to slow down a little bit. And see if you can feel the sensations of the chair holding you or whatever you're sitting or lying on. If your feet are on the floor, notice the contact of your feet with the floor. And as you continue to breathe slowly and maybe slightly more deeply, it's like you're creating a space inside yourself, some new discoveries to happen about yourself. I'm going to ask you to take a moment here and bring back a specific memory of you being triggered in the context of an adult relationship. And just open up, see if some image or memory occurs to you. And if you don't have a specific memory, you may have a vague sense of what was happening that was triggering for you. So bring back that memory. Who were you with? Where were you? And can you remember, or at least have a sense of what was said or done or not said or not done that was upsetting or surprising or painful? So what was the triggering stimulus? So that would be the first element of your trigger signature, is what happened actually in the outside world that triggered you. Could be a tone of voice or a facial expression too. So take a moment. That memory gets more clear. And then I'm going to ask you a few other questions about it. You might even want to jot down some notes if you think that would be helpful. So jot down something about what was the incident or the triggering stimulus. Now, often, as soon as that triggering event happens, we notice something in our body sensations, or we might notice something more in our feelings, like hurt feelings or angry feelings. Or we might feel body sensations like tightness, or it's like your heart drops down. Or you might even be aware of going kind of numb or blank, like deer in the headlights. So what was the feeling, the predominant feeling, and what body sensation seemed to be associated with that feeling? And perhaps there was a story that played in your mind, inner dialogue, self-talk, just words like, she doesn't get me, or I can't do anything right. Just words that illustrate your state of mind and your state of body. So these elements, something happening on the outside, having a feeling reaction, a bodily reaction perhaps also, and often a story or some mental talk, some meaning you made out of the incident. Those are the elements of your trigger signature. In this one case, this gives you data about what your trigger signature is, but this is only one data point. But let's just get clear on this one. Okay. Somebody talked to me, or my partner, let's say, talked to me in a very shrill tone of voice, what I judged as shrill. I felt the urge to run out of the room or get away from it. I noticed a feeling of almost like overwhelming bewilderment, like maybe the words also came over, what did I do wrong, or something like that. So this is an example of a composite of feelings, sensations, and stories, and a triggering stimulus, that if you jotted those things down, that would be one data point to begin to recognize, oh, this is my trigger signature. And when I feel or sense or notice any of these things happening in me, that's a signal for me to pause. Pause and inquire and calm my nervous system down. And not react. Pause and stop talking, or stop running out of the room, or stop that judgmental thought, and feel what's really going on for me, and relax into a feeling of, I can breathe. I can calm my nervous system down. I'm safe again. So that's the purpose of knowing your trigger signature, is so you can stop that automatic runaway freight train from taking over your behavior and your nervous system. Now, I would suggest that you do this exercise on 5 different triggering incidents and make the same kind of notes for each one. And you'll probably see a pattern. There'll probably be 1 or 2 types of situations that generally seem to be triggering for you, maybe like being criticized or having the other person move away from you. Those are typical situations that trigger people. And you'll probably notice certain familiar body sensations that go along with being triggered. And there's either some consistency, maybe all 5 of them are pretty similar, or yet you can see 2 different trigger signature patterns. We don't always just have one. But this gives you, once you've done this exercise with yourself, and it doesn't take much time, you're more prepared to move through life, ready to respond to these inner cues in a way that's going to be more present, more self-aware, and is going to ultimately have you be more connected with your actual present time reality. That's the exercise. And just notice how you feel beginning to do this exploration. And I want you to take away the value that this gives you tremendous power over your triggers once you've really gotten this under your belt and you know how to pause when you see any one of these early warning signs. It takes some humility, it takes some practice, but I would say, what fun. What fun to know yourself better, to have a little more mastery over your automatic patterns. Okay, thanks for your attention in this.
Thank you so much. And how can people who are listening find you if they want to go deeper with your work?
My website is susancampbell.com. And if you go there, on the homepage, there's a place to subscribe to my newsletter. And you'll also get a free ebook. It's called Getting Real Confidence, but it contains, among other resources, the compassionate self-inquiry exercise, where you take yourself through an old memory of being triggered and you offer compassion to yourself at the end of it. We've talked about it here, but you can get it for free. You can also buy my book, and all my books and some of the books that are out of print are also on my website. And I also, if you do subscribe to my newsletter, I offer a free monthly group coaching call on Tuesday mornings. So, at least in Pacific time, Tuesday mornings. So I urge you to stay in touch with me.
How awesome. That's such a great offer. I love it. Thank you so much for taking this time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing too, China. This was a lot of fun for me.
Thank you.